Lovely. So I will just get my screen shared to explain what we're doing today. So if you remember from last half term, before May half term break, you were due to have a session, but then we had many bank holidays. So for that session, instead, you were sent some videos to watch around all the things that have been on for Autism Week. So hopefully you had a look through them, because there's some really useful resources and some great trainers there that we funded to speak in the borough, particularly one around young people who are struggling to attend. So it was called something around about what to do to ensure your child doesn't come to school. So a bit of irony there, but the because we know that that's been a bit of an issue in terms of, well, across the country, not just locally, in terms of autistic young people really struggling with attendance for a number of reasons. So that was a really useful session from an external speaker as well. So I suggest you, if you haven't already seen that, or if there's members of staff within your school that you think it'd be relevant for, then please do signpost them to that. Today we're going to be looking at transitions, particularly around the transition to high school, which again is another sort of trigger point, I guess, within the school system, where it's a big jump really from primary to secondary, and it's a time when things can appear that maybe weren't seen before, or there's certain areas of need that might be addressed in different ways. So we'll go into that, and then there'll be a bit of time just to get some feedback on the things you found useful so far, and any topics that you would like for next academic year. And I'll touch on that more at the end. I did put in an email, but you might not have registered that I'm going on maternity leave in a couple of weeks' time. So if I look like I'm sort of rolling around, it's because I'm sitting on a yoga ball trying to get comfortable in this heat. So I'll explain as well about who will be overseeing this course in my absence while I'm on maternity leave. So first up, and I want you to put in the chat for this, if we think about all of the traits related to an autism diagnosis, so around the social side of things, that restrictive or repetitive behaviour or interests, sensory and anxiety, why might our young people find transitions, and particularly the transition to secondary, a bit tricky? So I'm going to keep my eye on the chat, and it'd be great if people could put some ideas in there. Lovely. So we've got things coming in: unfamiliar adults, and quite a lot more adults often. So not just your one kind of class teacher and potentially one TA around. Unknown routines, yep, and lots of more routines of moving to different places, different setting, different classrooms for different lessons. Change of friends, a new place, new building, disruption to routines, the unknown, bigger, everything being bigger and new. Making friends, getting lost, getting told off, yes, stuff around rules, definitely. Traveling to the new school, transport, yep. So it's a lot can change just all at once, really, can't it? If they were always used to being dropped off at school or walking around the corner, and suddenly they've got to get the bus. Higher stakes learning, or certainly there being a kind of pressure to make it feel like there is. So I know obviously around sort of the year 6 time, there's all that stuff around, oh, you've got SATs coming up, you need to be working hardest, or you're going into year 6, and there's always something, isn't there? But with secondary, obviously there's the threat of GCSEs looming quite distantly ahead, but it's certainly there, and it's referred to. More children around, more adults around, harder work possibly fitting in, yep. And we see that certainly where you might have been in a year group of people that you've been with for 7 years possibly, where everyone kind of just understands each other, and you know where you fit and who you get on with and who you're not that bothered about. Whereas with secondary, it's often a lot more kind of different groups with individuals trying to find how they fit into that, and then navigating puberty and all of that as well. No one's mentioned puberty. That's another one that often comes alongside everything else as well. Possibly more responsibility, independence. Yeah. So we're kind of aware of the things that could be going on and why our young people might find it particularly tricky. So, let me just move the chat out of the way. What's happened here? Okay. Sorry. So, just to touch on homework. Homework's another thing that can change, and so there's a few reasons for that. Can be around that thought process of home being a place for relaxation and school being the workplace. Might be, so they might have gone to like a homework club at primary school possibly, or have had a lot less homework and it not been such an issue. Like to have a clear start and finish, and again, homework in primary might have been more around project-based sort of work. Often with secondary, it's all online, and again, that kind of understanding if it's an ongoing project or if there's kind of lots of steps involved and it's not particularly clear, that can be an issue. And sometimes homework can be one of the things that kind of flags up that somebody's struggling a bit. Interestingly, research has found that homework itself doesn't necessarily improve outcomes in terms of academic achievement and sort of exam results, but it's still something that schools and secondaries in particular are quite keen on. So it's often something that the young people have to kind of overcome, as well as all of the issues that you've already mentioned. So back into the chat, is there anything you can think of that we can do now while they're still with you guys in primary to help support that sort of transition and the changes that are ahead? And it might be stuff that you're already doing. So tell me anything that you know already goes on in your school, or things that you would like to happen in a kind of ideal world. So is there any sort of transition kind of support already going on? Lovely. So we've got transition groups running through the summer 2 term. Yep. It's often, that's good, about additional transition time set aside post SATs. It is often the support, you want to get SATs out of the way and then we focus on the transition, which is great that you're doing that, but in an ideal world, it will be started kind of a lot earlier than that as well. We can talk about that for sort of implications for next year as well. Visiting the schools, definitely. So if there's opportunities for you to go alongside the young person to have additional visits or to get photographs from the secondary schools, a lot of the schools used to, we used to try and collect a kind of transition book from the secondaries. So we did a template that was sent to all the secondaries, and some had their own system, so didn't necessarily always use our ones, but there should be something in place. So even if you've got a child who doesn't get additional visits, you should be able to contact them and ask for extra kind of pictures and things like that to go through with the young person. New teachers coming to visit, that's lovely. Does that actually happen? I wonder what school you're at, Julia. Let me know, because that's great if that is in place. In some schools, they have some of the secondary teachers coming in to visit and actually taking some of the lessons for the year sixes, which again is great to sort of see that transition. All Saints, Coshilton, I'm guessing. Lovely. And again, I know of some secondaries where they have a kind of more of a primary type of model for the start of year 6. So for some classes, in some settings, it's all classes. For some, it's just some classes, but they're set up more where they just have one teacher for all the subjects, so that they don't have that big change, as well as the whole environment and the people as well. Communication with new school, yep. How the school operates, yeah, we want to know some of those specifics, don't we, about rules and things. Visitors to run workshops on worry, great. So having, whether it's done within school or by a visitor, having additional workshops around sort of how to process all of those emotions. Travel training, yep, that's an important one to access if you have young people that are eligible. Independence with homework transition club, great. Mental health workshops. Oh, some more staff visiting, great. Homework clubs, yes, so that you can kind of get them set up, ready to go when they go to secondary. New schools having a very clear understanding of the child. That's an important one. And knowing that it's not a choice. I wonder what you mean there about not a choice. What part is not a choice? If you let me know, Amy, because I'm making an assumption, but I don't want to say it in case it's not quite right. I don't know if you're aware there are, with the all of your Senkos, some of you might be Senkos, but otherwise in your school there'll be the Senko will access regular meetings with the other Senkos in the borough and also people from Cognos and Sutton Council. And as part of that, they have a transition specific meeting where there is handover of information. So all the stuff you have around like EHCPs and also IEPs or specific pupil plans, they are shared with the receiving school. However, sometimes time-wise, the focus can be on those children who've got an EHCP, and there might not be as much time to discuss those who don't meet that criteria but still have specific requirements. So let me just see what you said. I meant some children aren't, that some children aren't, e.g. doing homework, getting book out because they can't. It's not because they're lazy, right? Yeah, so that understanding of the child basically, and their intentions really, yeah. And I think if there is, any information that you've got, it's so important that that is handed over and also maybe shared with parents, because parents are the ones who can then follow it through on an ongoing basis, and kind of chase up those schools as well to just prompt them, like, oh, do you remember? Because sometimes in secondaries there can be a thing where stuff gets kind of mislaid, or they want to get the opportunity to get to know the young person, but it's important to have those things in place that you already know are working. So if you give that to parents, they can kind of follow up on those things as well. What have I missed on here? So we had about homework clubs, yep. Summer transition activities, yes. So with that, for children to make friends, yeah. There are some specific transition groups run via, I think they're already probably fully booked for this year, but run at the quad. So I believe the referral process through that is either via the vulnerable pupil panel, which is something, again, your Senkos will know about, or I think through an early help assessment. So that would be kind of specific transition work for young people that might be at risk of exclusion going to secondary. But there's also activities that the parents can do over the summer holidays as well. What's the pastoral team like? Is there quite a space for the children to access trusted adults they can turn to? Yep, great. So some good examples here of kind of the information that we would want to know. And do you find that with the schools that your children generally go to, because obviously you can end up with children going to lots of different schools, but do you find it easy to get that information from the secondaries? It probably depends on, you may or may not know about that, and it probably depends on how long you've been in that role and the existing relationships, but it'd be interesting to know if people find that quite easy. I'll just keep an eye on that in case anybody replies. So we are going to have a look at the transition to secondary autism support map. So this has been mentioned before as a resource. There's a autism support map that basically covers lots of different areas. And one of them is transition to secondary. So I will share the link for this in the chat as well later on. But basically on these kind of different sections, there's advice from year 5 upwards, and there's ideas for things that the school can do, but also things parents can do. So, for example, with year 5, we've got things like encouraging the parents to visit the secondary school, obviously at open days, getting that kind of idea, but also just like looking outside them, getting a feel for the area, because sometimes it's more important the kind of the vibe you get or the feeling than necessarily the Ofsted rating. It's how that individual is going to fit in that environment. Also helping the parents to understand the provisions that are available. We have some kind of misconceptions where, for example, with Oaks Park, because they have a specialist base, sometimes parents assume, oh, if we get our child in there, then they can access the base even if they don't have an EHCP. And that's not really the case. So it's helping individuals to understand what the options are and kind of the benefits of different settings. And then questions for them to think about when visiting the schools, and that's there's some examples of that later on. Starting to try and help the young people, again from year 5, to develop those independent skills. So getting them to write down their homework, if it's someone that it's always written down for them, getting them to try and kind of increase that independence, organize their things. And where with secondaries, you generally have a 1-page timetable for the week. That's something you can introduce in year 5, maybe towards the end of year 5. But again, getting them to refer back to that themselves and being used to knowing the different kind of elements of the day. And then in year 6, we've got a transition book. So you can, again, like I said, request information from the secondary school. They may have their own transition pack. If they don't, there's a template here that they can use, so you can signpost them to that one. And again, ideally, sort of throughout year 6, but this will depend on the young person, because you can over-prepare if you have a young person who kind of too much information is anxiety inducing. So it's knowing the cohort of people you're working with, but having those sessions where you can discuss fears, rate different aspects of the transition, using like a 1 to 5 scale, and I'll give some examples of that on the next few slides. But from young people's perspective, the main fears are about being bullied, not making friends, getting lost, worrying about homework, not being able to do their homework, traveling, like you said, about not having the right equipment. That's something else that you see poor little year 7s with these massive backpacks, because they've just got every possible piece of equipment for every subject in their bag, and they're almost like toppling over. Not knowing what to do if there's a problem, not getting on with teachers, or getting into trouble. That's their kind of main worries. And again, you could have a sort of social story for the first day or the first week to help with that process. Something else, and I've seen some schools doing this, I don't know if any of you on the call have, it'd be great to hear if you have, is having some old year 6 students, so current year 7s, coming back and visiting, and maybe doing a talk to the whole year group or just a smaller group of students to kind of reassure them that hopefully it wasn't as bad as they thought it was going to be. Sometimes it can be, they can write letters or, you know, record like a little video or something just to hear from somebody else. It kind of keeps it real. There's some useful resources on the Anna Freud Centre, which again, if you go onto this document on a computer, anything underlined is a clickable link. So that's a useful, again, signposting. And down the bottom there, you've got the AET Transition Toolkit, which is another useful set of resources. Pupil Transition Booklet, which is a template to fill out for the young person, so a bit like a social story, and also a personal passport. So like I was saying, that information that you guys in the primary have got from years of getting to know the young person, you can help them to put that down on paper. It's great if it comes from the young person as well, with a bit of guidance from you, because then the young person has ownership of that and they can kind of self-advocate for themselves and share that with the professionals in the new setting. So I've seen that work really nicely in, I think it was in St. Phil's, where it was actually stuck into some of the students' planners. And so they, it would be up to them to kind of flag it up if things weren't in place that they needed. So if they should have had like a visual breakdown of the lesson or printouts of the slides, then they would check on their planner, look at their personal passport or their recommendations, and then they could ask the teacher if that was possible. So again, all of these things are sort of helping for life skills and hopefully improving chances of successful employment as well. So get rid of the chats in the way. The oh, am I going backwards here? No, I'm just getting a bigger one. So the other ideas here are for the secondary school. It's just to be aware of, again, the things that we would recommend for the secondaries are for them to be liaising with you guys as the primary, requesting all the information in advance, ideally visiting the young person in the primary school, but obviously that's not possible for all students. Although I've had experiences where I've done that with a school and it's been quite eye-opening, really. So there was a student who's now, I think he's year 10, and we visited him in year 6 in his school, which was an out-of-borough school. And in the primary school, he was isolated from the other children. He was kind of sitting at the back with his own sort of workstation. And he seemed kind of quite a recluse, but also sort of did his own thing quite a lot. And then once he came to secondary school, which was one of the grammars, the requirements and kind of expectations for him were quite different. So he was integrated a lot more within the class. Had a few kind of hiccups in the first year where all of that sort of usual stuff where he didn't really know his own strength. He was a bit bigger than some of the other students, and he would, on a couple of occasions, he I think was like trying out wrestling moves on them in the playground and ended up pinning somebody up against a fence and things like that. But we knew from seeing him in the primary and meeting his parents at the primary that wasn't a behavioural issue, that it was just his understanding of social interaction. And so it could kind of be nipped in the bud really quickly, and he's just been like a model student ever since. So I think from him seeing, and I bumped into the parents recently, and they said, "Oh, do you remember when we met you, way back when he was in year 6?" And it really stuck with them and with him as well, because we chatted to him and with us as well, just to see him from that point before he came. So if you can get staff members to come from the secondary, then it's a really valuable experience. And there's just some bits and bobs there around things like things that you have mentioned as areas of kind of concern, where they can go highlighted on a map if they need a quiet area, who the key members of staff are, ideally with some photos, a colour-coded school map and timetable so that they know, again, how to organise themselves as well, so they can put the resources they need related to that subject in a specific coloured plastic wallet, perhaps. Written school rules, I'll give an example of that in a bit as well. And And then also thinking just specifically around the first day and the first weeks. And there's another useful download there in the bottom left that can be used to support with that. So signposting for parents, because obviously you can do what you can in the next sort of 6 weeks or however long we've got left. 5 weeks? Don't know, I've lost track now. No, less than that. 4.5, I think someone was saying. But then you've got a 6-week break. So you want to give the parents some things as well to kind of continue all of those conversations with. So here you've got some of the questions for them to consider before they're choosing a secondary school. So more sort of year 5, start of year 6. And then some support that they can be aware of, like travel training that somebody mentioned. Some of the ideas there about going through the transition book, and who to speak to afterwards, because they may be very used to having an open door kind of policy where they just pop in after school to speak to the class teacher, and that doesn't work in the same way in secondary. So it's kind of thinking about their confidence levels as well to go and knock on the door or ask for a meeting with the SENCO in the secondary school. And this was some of the things I talked about in terms of the key, the top reported worries young people have. You could get them, or at home they could do as well, rating those, how they feel about each one. You'll then know which ones are their main kind of areas of concern, and those are the topics you can then discuss in more detail, and then hopefully get them to check in again a few weeks later, and hopefully their anxiety will have reduced slightly about that area. Also, it's a nice, I mean, this is kind of standard stuff that you probably do at the end of their school year anyway, but reflecting on their time at primary school, and not being too kind of emotional or negatively emotional about it. So seeing change as a part of life and as a positive thing. So it's very easy for us as adults as well to get quite we get attached to some of the students we're working with, and we feel quite sad about them leaving. And I know there's a student I've been working with in secondary where we've been saying that because we've worked intensely with this young man, and myself, the SENCO, and the SENCO support assistant have all said like he's clearly just going to be like, okay, I'm off now, bye everyone, and we're going to be like, oh no, don't leave. Whereas he's, I think, going to cope with the change better than we are. So as adults, we need to be aware of the conversations we're having, and it's useful to highlight that to parents as well, because young people pick up on that anxiety from others, and we don't want them to be mirroring something that is not necessarily how they actually feel, but then creates anxiety for them. Recognizing the changes between primary and secondary, and also the things that stay the same. It's important to have that. Yes, there will be changes, but there's a lot that will still be quite similar. Like I've said, going through travel plans, think about questions they might like to ask, a workspace at home possibly to help them keep organized. School uniform, getting them to wash that a few times at home so it's less itchy, and plan B scenarios that I think I've got an example of as well. And there's a load of more there for parents, particularly around organisation. Things like laminating a copy of the timetable and attaching it to their blazer with a springy clip. Useful, practical one. And I see that working quite well for those children who are always losing things and then have no idea where they're meant to go. Or again, having reminders on like a phone or smartwatch so that it buzzes and tells them what classroom they have to go to each time. To be honest, I find the secondary timetables quite hard to navigate because they often have code words or codes for the staff member, a code for the room, and a code for the subject, and it's all in tiny font. So if you can get them to kind of color code their own version or make it a bit more readable, that can be helpful as well. And things like packing their bags. So helping individuals to plan ahead, have checklists. This is all stuff, again, you can share with parents. So all of this information on here is on the link that I will give you for the transition to secondary support map. There's a few things there again for questions to ask the secondary school. So this could be for the student who's going there next year, but it can also be for your current year 5s who are looking at schools maybe at the start of next year. There's some useful set of questions there around things that they can ask when they go and visit, and it will help them gain a better insight into that setting. And like I said, trying to compare the things that might change, but also the things that stay the same. So using visuals for that as well, such as comparing like the dinner hall to a school canteen, how that might work differently. You might be using fingerprint ID to pay for things and therefore have to make sure that it's topped up with money regularly. Or they might be having a packed lunch, which would be basically the same. And so again, it's those conversations you're already having, but having it in a chart like this, potentially with some pictures, can help to process that visual information. Trying to color code maps of the school to help navigate around them. I think we don't always realize when we're new to a school how kind of confusing they can be, especially as a lot of schools have started off with a smallish building and have had all these bits added on. It can be quite a maze for people to navigate. And like someone said earlier on about the rules and consequences, they might be worried about breaking the rules, or there might be much sort of stricter rules in secondary. And so it's really important for them to understand what those consequences could be. And it's again that kind of black and white thinking that actually, if you know in advance, it can be really helpful for that predictability. So there's some examples there, but again, you can ask for those from the secondary, or they may have already provided you with that because there were templates in the packs that were originally sent to them. So a kind of plan B card here. Again, I think I might have mentioned before how useful it is to have something written down, whether it's on your phone or like a little laminated card, to look at when a situation kind of arises, because when we're in that heightened anxiety state, it's really hard to think rationally. So you can have, for example, I was doing some the other day that were around what to do if I forget my homework. So you could then have a reminder of that in the pocket. So they've kind of got a little script to say to the teacher, or what to do if my bus doesn't come. And then you can also have these kind of cards for requesting time out or requesting time in a kind of safe or chill out area to help just regulate. And you've got there again like an actual sort of scripted prompt. So you can say, I need time out. If the young person isn't comfortable with that, it could be that they just show this kind of card. And understanding if someone stops you in the corridor, I need to show my timeout card, because there can be other staff members who might not be aware of the system. So it's just helping to have that insight. And again, you could draw like comic strip conversations there to sort of almost model it, role play the situation, just to help, again, make it a bit more familiar and predictable. And you might want to be thinking about calendars. This, to be honest, this is for any year group, just to help understand the summer holidays, really, because it's a big chunk of time. So you've got there an example from the May half term. So the start of June, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, you've got the home picture, and then back to school again. But you could do the same thing for the August break, so that you've got all the days marked as at home. It could literally just be an H on the calendar. And this is often, when schools do this, they often send this home with multiple students, just so they have it at home and they can tick off each day before bed, possibly, because some students will just about get used to being at home and suddenly it's time to go back in again. So it's helping with that understanding of concepts of time as well. So we've kind of covered this already, really, in terms of the key points for discussion. So if you have got class discussions around this, or groups being delivered by other staff members, these are some of the key discussion points. Like I said, role-playing situations, and there's some examples there of what a plan B could be for. A friend being unwell is a good example as well, because they may have just one key friend. So what happens when that person isn't in school? Things like own clothes day, or off timetable days where things are a little bit different, and getting lost is another useful one. And that's some of the examples of what the cards might look like. So as I mentioned, the kind of main concept really as well is to be trying to be positive about it. Acknowledge that you you've enjoyed spending time with them, you might miss them, but trying to be really positive about that change and what the future holds, because we know that we have our own sort of anxiety curves, and the young people we work with or our children will often mirror that curve as well. So if our anxiety is going up, theirs will often go up in response. And then often we bounce off each other. So trying to have that kind of positive focus, especially if you know they may not be getting that at home. If parents are quite anxious about it, then it's even more important to have that kind of focus. So what I would like to go on to, well, in fact, I'll pause there. Are there any questions? You can shout them out or put them in the chat. If you've got any questions on that kind of transition to secondary side of things. I'll just wait for a second or two, see if there's anything coming through about any questions about transition to secondary. It's important to note here as well, with the transition, and in fact, I will mirror my screen to show you on here. So you can find the Cognos Autism Support Map just by typing that in, Cognos Autism Support Map. It's the first one that comes up. I will send the link as well. And transition to secondary is down here in the bottom right. You have to click on it and then click on it, this image again, which will bring up the whole PDF document. All of that stuff I went through. One of the things you've got in here, this transition booklet, it will take you to a resource list here. And you've got an example of a child's primary transition book. And then you've also got the secondary school transition pack template. So if you click on the child's primary transition book, let me check if you can see that. Can you see a PowerPoint coming up now, or are you still on the website? No. So let me just reshare this. So you should be able to see that now. Johnny's transition book. Yeah. So there's an example here that can be used for all year groups as well. So it's important to prepare for any kind of transition. So obviously secondary is the big one, but each year is quite a major transition, going up to maybe a new classroom, new teacher, etc. So on here you have got examples of where you're going to be going to after the summer holidays, photos of the new school or the classroom, some examples of the staff who are going to be in there, what your new classroom looks like, where they're going to hang up their coat, what toilets they're going to be using. And even if they're staying the same, keep a picture in there, because it's always reassuring when there's something that is familiar. Lunchtime supervisor, where you're going to have your lunch, where you're going to play, what hall you're using, where you're going to be collected. And there's a few other sort of tips on there as well. So that you can find by going to, I think it was on here, yep, going through the autism support map, and it will take you to here, or you can also just go on to social communication resources, and some of the things I mentioned, the transition toolkit and things are linked there as well. So yeah, just a reminder that it's also about transition between year groups as well as intersecondary. Okay, so I'm just going to go back to our presentation. So I didn't see any questions coming up. So I'm going to move on now to the last part, which is around feedback from these sessions. So I'm going to have a quick recap of the topics we've covered. Now, I know some of you have joined more recently, but we actually started these last summer. So we had a session last year before the summer holidays, and then we've had one every half term since then. So last summer we were looking at high quality or quality first teaching strategies, those kind of key strategies around communication, visuals, and adapting the environment. And there's also those short videos on our YouTube channel around those as well. Then in the autumn term, we looked at supporting social inclusion and all of those things you can do, having displays, books in your library, buddy systems to help autistic individuals feel more included. We looked then in autumn 2 at the sensory differences and impact of learning. And you had Sophie Nash, the occupational therapist, leading on that session. Then we had in spring, supporting language and social communication through quality first teaching. And again, those ones are, all three of those are on the YouTube channel if they're ones that you missed and you'd like to go back and look at them or share with your colleagues. We then were looking at how to support a young person to understand their autistic identity, and also some Autism Week kind of planning and checking in about how you're sharing information across your settings with other staff. The summer one, we had those information sharing of those videos from Autism Week, and then today's session around transition to secondary. So what I'd like to do is get some feedback from you. And this is quite good timing because, as I was mentioning, there'll be somebody covering my role while I'm on maternity leave. So it's going to be a lady called Alex who will be leading on these sessions, but also could get in other professionals if there's certain areas you would like more information on. So I am going to copy the link to this Jamboard and pop it in the chat for you. And it would be great if you're able to click on the Jamboard. We have used them before, so hopefully it works for everybody. And then I can share my screen with the Jamboard as well, just so you've got that on both sides, but you'll see it yourselves. So you click on the link, the web page should come up. I can see a few people have joined. And you can see 2 pages of questions. So question number 1 is what you found useful from the topics that I just shared that we'd covered since last summer. And the second page is what you'd like to cover next year. And I can then share all that information with Alex so she can put together a program of sessions for next year as well. So if you are unsure about Jamboard, the easiest thing to do is click on the sticky note symbol, which is on the left-hand side on that sort of tab where there's lots of different symbols. It's the 4th one down. You click on that, then just type in your ideas. You can change the color of the post-it note if you want to, and submit, and it will then appear on the screen. So I can see a couple of things coming in already. So I'll leave you a few minutes to add to both of those pages really, and then we'll have a quick look. Anyone who's got any problems accessing it, do shout out or put it in the chat as well. A lot coming in about resources, which is great. Ability to ask questions, good. Sensory, lovely. Sensory session coming up a few times. Using the correct language. Yep, understand their autism diagnosis, great. Transition advice, strategies, the template. Lovely. I need to, I keep thinking of all these things I need to do, but it's not really, I'm running out of time, but we probably need to have like, I recently discovered Padlets, which a lot of people use to share kind of resources and things. Something like that to have all the kind of resources in the same area, or possibly on the website going forward, but I think we've got so many and ours are highly visual, so sometimes they the size of them kind of breaks the internet. Language and terminology, lovely. That's quite a key one for that sort of basis of having a positive approach. Support for parents, questions for secondary, great. And remember as well, this is for all of the sessions we've had as well, not just today's one. Support map for year 5 and 6, great. Accessible resources, older pupils to share experiences, yeah, lovely. There are as well quite a few autistic young people who are young adults who will speak in schools as well about their own experiences. So I know some students who used to attend, I think they were at Overton and what was Stanley Park, Oaks Park, called Smith and Spooner. They've got a website and they charge, but they do talks. They did a talk for us for Autism Week a couple of years ago. So there's one on our Cognish YouTube channel, which you can also use to share with young people, but you can get them in to come and speak to students as well. But obviously, if you have students who used to come to your school, they're then less likely to charge, plus they've got that personal relationship with the school, and young people might be able to identify with them more. So if you haven't already, please add to the second page. So click on the arrow at the top where it says 1 out of 2, and it will move over to 2 of 2. And I can see we've got some things on here already about what you'd like to cover next year. So some great ideas here, which will be really useful to pass on to Alex. So strategies to support more extreme behaviours. And that's probably quite a relevant one for a lot of people. And I know it's something that she's got experience with. Similar to that one that just appeared, supporting risky behaviour, escaping violent behaviour. Supporting autistic students in subjects which can be more challenging for them. Yes, so specifically around certain subjects. Masking, yep. We have got a document that we created. Again, I could send you that as well. Let me write that down. Which was kind of top tips, something you could stick up and put in your staff room around trying to prevent masking in schools. Because often it's not about what needs to be done at home, it's about helping the young person to be more themselves in school so that they don't need to mask and don't need to then let it all out at home. So I'll send that with the slides as well. Somewhere to share resources. Yep, IT has been a bit of an issue at different times, but that would be helpful as well. Discussing how we've implemented the role in our settings. Lovely. Yeah, that would be a nice starting point, actually. We might have a few minutes to talk about that today, because it'd be interesting for me to hear as well. I know it's been different in different places. The zones, what comes after it, something to use for something else. Supporting behavioural needs. Yep. EAL. Difficult conversations with parents, friendship, social skills groups. Supporting risky behaviour, escaping area and violent behaviour. Me too. Does that mean that it's wanting support around your own violent behaviour, or I'm not sure what the Me Too bit means there. Helping parents accept the diagnosis. Yeah, and I think one of the key things to remember with that, or what I've seen in my 9 years doing this role, is that you can be a little drop in the ocean, but you might be a key drop. But it doesn't fully click until someone else down the line says something, but you might have been the one that kind of laid all that groundwork. Demand avoidance, zones again, masking, yep, more stuff around family, girls, calm classroom, which isn't too noisy for those with sensory processing needs, yep. Okay, lovely, some great ideas there. So carry on adding to that if you still are. I just had seen a question in the chat about, would you recommend autistic ex-pupils to visit, or any ex-pupil? I mean, ideally autistic if you can, because so anybody is better than nobody, but it would be great if you can have a kind of neurodivergent little sort of focus group or workshop, and you have a student, and I suppose they don't necessarily need to be autistic, but as long as they're kind of, I mean, I've worked with students doing some stuff around transition to university, and the guy was actually dyslexic, but he still had that neurodiverse sort of way of looking at things, and he could identify with certain things that he felt anxious about. So somebody that you feel will be able to, because you don't want them to be completely overwhelmed as well, talking to loads of students. So it'd be nice if there was kind of a small group one. So yeah, keep adding to that. We've got about 5 minutes, and I know we did previously discuss the question there around how we've implemented the role in our settings, but it was a few months back now. So as the person says there, it'd be good to get more ideas on how we can support our staff in an effective way. So I'm going to stop sharing, and it would be great if anybody wanted to verbally share or put in the chat how they have been using this role. And your role is as kind of autism champions, but we've also been calling it autism leads, because you're the person within your setting who is kind of leading on autism and also championing that across the school, whether that's with teaching assistants or teachers, or both. And you're that kind of second point of call aside from the Senko. So anybody who wants to share, please, verbally, please go for it, or you can put it in the chat as well. And if you struggled as well, it's okay to share that. So we've got some bits there around using the resources to train other members of staff, discussions with parents, inclusion coffee morning, lovely. Lunch club, transition club, great. Yeah, did you have to fight for that kind of PMD slot and how to share with staff? Because I know that in an ideal sort of setting, or ideal world, I guess, autism would always be on the agenda. So yes. And I know that whatever you're leading on in a school, you have to kind of fight for your voice to be heard over, the updates on moderation and everything else. So I think it's that's how you bring something extra to the role by or to your school, actually, by being the advocate for those young people and kind of keeping it on the agenda. I was talking to somebody this morning who was saying about training for staff, and they've had quite a lot of training, but some people are doing things consistently and others aren't doing it at all. And it just, like with everything, sort of hearing stuff once is never really enough. We need that regular sort of drip feeding of information. So things on the school website, yep. Training once a week. I don't know what MITA stands for. Multi something teaching, I don't know. But I'm assuming you're saying no, you didn't have to fight for a slot, which is really good if that's the case. Someone sent a Google form out, which is great. Only just heard about it, that's fine.
Thank you.
Bye,
Robbie.
We've got coffee mornings, lovely. Action plan for next year, great. And I think if you can incorporate some of these things in your school improvement plan as well, or your own sort of targets, that can help to make sure they actually happen, because I know how easy it is for these things to come at the end of your to-do list. Okay, so hopefully that gives you a bit of an idea, but perhaps I will note down on there around the kind of action planning and maybe some more regular check-ins through these meetings about what you've done each term or half term, because it's that accountability as well that can be helpful. So just before we finish up, I am going to share, we've got something else in the chat. Maximizing the impact of teaching assistants, thank you. So I was completely off on my guess. Yes, so important to note, you need to re-register for the training for next year. I did ask if it was possible for you automatically to be booked on, and apparently it isn't, unfortunately. So again, I'm going to share this in the chat as well, so that you can register yourself straight away if you can, or share it with somebody else if it needs to be registered for you. Has that worked? I don't think it has, hang on. Oh, maybe it had. Right, so the link is in the chat to register for next year's training, so from September onwards. And remember, you can have, it can be more than one person as well from your setting, but make sure you get that booked on, otherwise you won't be getting the information about it for next year, particularly as it will be Alex running them initially, not myself. And then I'll also copy across the evaluation for today's session. So the second link, the forms one, is feedback from today. So it'd be great if you're able to fill that out as well, just to say what you found useful from today's session around transitions. But I will share the Jamboard information with Alex about the kind of content for future sessions. So we are sort of bang on time. So I will wish you all a lovely last few weeks and summer holidays. I'm sure yours will be more relaxing than mine while I'm waiting to give birth. But hope that you'll have a great time. And I'm sure I'll be keeping in touch and kind of hearing what's going on generally in the borough. But otherwise, hopefully I will see you all again in kind of a year's time, I guess. But thank you for all your input over the last year and with these sessions. And yeah, do keep in touch. I'll just pop in here as well. If you have any questions, the 22-23, that's let me check that, hang on a second. So that's the email address for the autism service, but if you email me when I'm on maternity leave, I'll have the hour of office on, which will signpost you who to contact. Let me just check that then, because I wonder if they've edited it wrong. The autism training one, if you were talking about that being 22-23, that's because it's academic year 22-23. But the actual training itself, sorry, I've sent the wrong one, that's why. I should have scrolled down the page. So that is the full link for next year's ones. And let me just check, it doesn't say closed. Yeah, no, that's fine. So that's got all the dates as well, same time on Tuesday for each half term, so the 6 sessions for the year ahead. So get them in your diaries now. Thank you for that nice comment as well. And yeah, any questions, let me know, but I will send out the slides and those links as well in an email. But yeah, otherwise have a good rest of the day, week and term. Take care, everybody. Thank you.